What's up, dudes? Venomous Stare, TLO Neeb, Game 2, Abyssal Reef. Let's get into it. Neeb is going out here with a probe. Now this is pretty standard for Neeb. He's the kind of guy who likes to get the natural blocked if he can, and I love this. Many Protoss players have kind of forgotten how useful this is. Back in Wings of Liberty we saw this pretty much every single game. Some Protoss players would go as far as to block with pylons, and some guys would even open Forge and threaten a cannon rush. Now Neeb doesn't really do cannon rushes per se. He's more of a gate expand, even a Nexus first type guy. Now TLO checked out behind the mineral line there, and he is aware of the fact that Neeb is definitely one of these hatch block types. Now look at this. TLO just goes straight to this middle base. Great job there. Neeb will soar into the main, and just look how diligent TLO is being. He does not want to lose to a proxy. It's a best of 3. He is down 1 game to 0. Gate expand for Neeb. Now he does have the gas geyser. He's not really mining from it though. There's the Expo. And a quick 3 base from TLO. So this is much nicer from TLO than the previous game. In the previous game he was in this weird spot where Neeb successfully delayed his base, and on Defender's Landing it might seem like a similar setup where, oh, you have the natural and then kind of a weird narrow choke and then a forward base, but it's not really the same. Defender's Landing, the spot that Dario was forced to take his third, was a much more disadvantageous position, I would say. Now this is, I think, proved true by the fact that this base that we saw him take over here in the middle is a base that, yeah, you see sometimes, but Cyril really likes to take this one, and so does a laser, I think. And over here is the one we usually see. So the fact that TLO elected to take this one kind of screams to me, well, there are multiple correct bases you can take versus Protoss. There's not one defined base that is really like the one that you pick. Because on certain maps it's very clear, like you have to take a certain third, because if you take your third base at a different location, it's almost undefendable. One of the things that I like most about Neeb's play is his focus on third base builds. As we see an Adept coming out here. Now the Adept can camp up here, which is kind of obnoxious. Of course, you can camp up here. No, I'm just joking. Just musing, because it was just basically countered what I said about this base being the same. Now the pro of this base is you can start spreading creep out earlier and really get your creep spread surging out to your opponent's third as another Adept comes out here. Of course, one of the bad sides is that high ground that we saw. And TLO is in a weird spot here. How many lings does he have? Yeah, that awkward moment. And Neeb is just continuing to pressure here. With queens out, it's really not that big of a deal. That's kind of the frustrating thing about playing Zerg as Protoss, or I guess as Terran too, is whenever you run into harass with just a couple units, in each one of their bases they should have a queen. Resonating Glaives is going to be the choice here for Neeb. Now it is being chronoed and we don't see a fourth yet. Still pretty damn early though, so I'm not saying it's an all-in. But guys, he already has Warp Gate. Now this Creep Tumor, granted it went up a ramp, now it's kind of in this middle area that can go over to the rocks. TLO running over with Speedlings. Now this is a hard wall in. I'm not going to scream and pretend this could be a big deal. With the depths here, Neeb is completely fine. He can just cancel there. And with a Robo, even if he had to hard wall in, it wouldn't be a big deal because he can just make a Prism. TLO scouting around, he sees the lack of third base, a bunch of lings on the way, and a Roach Warren. So TLO should know, okay, this is probably a Warp Gate all-in. But there is a probe out here. So is Neeb being deceptive? Does he really want to take a third? Now if we look, he actually just wants to take a third. Does TLO have Overlord speed? No, so it is kind of ambiguous. For all TLO knows, if we go to his vision, Neeb could have 5 gateways up here. And Neeb is going to pressure out here, and TLO was preparing. He had a lot of lings, The Roach Warren just completed, and a lot of lings are going to continue to be produced. 5 roaches as well, and the roaches are really going to be what staunches the bleeding here. Now queens are out, so the queens push back that push, but the roaches are the long-term solution here. A lot of lings are out still. TLO might try to counterattack. And like I said, Neeb really likes to keep an eye on his third as far as his build order choice. He's not a guy who does a lot of 2-base all-ins, and he's going to start to massacre drones. Lots of speedlings over here though, but Neeb does have his mothership core. Great move there. And the Warp Prism's kind of acting as the substitute for the mothership core as far as the defensive capability goes for the army. But we can see here the third base is under peril here as both the pylons go down. And the Warp Prism did pick up a few of the adepts, and a few of the other adepts, as I say a few, quite a few, surge into the main, phase into the natural. And Neeb is continuing to defend his third as holy crap, it's actually going to finish. And with that last ling dying, he can make a SimCity around it and protect it pretty well. 15 workers die as we go to units. TLO's down to 26! TLO's dead! Wow! That's it! The Protoss has 3 bases! Look how many workers he has! 57! If we go to the workers kill cab, Neeb has gone crazy this game, and suddenly TLO is in this weird position where he's just kind of sitting there like assessing the situation, seeing how many workers he has. Now he's going to run over here with roaches, see that the third base has so many probes. Now, perfect scenario here for TLO would be to see like, okay, he hasn't even saturated it, he's really far behind, and he maybe even cut workers. This is like the opposite of what he wanted to see, an entire saturated mineral line. Now he's staying in the game because it is his tournament life on the line, and is a best of 3, so if Neeb wins this, he wins the series. But TLO, you know, he's kind of wringing his hands and saying like, well, maybe he really committed a lot to that, maybe he just transferred a lot of workers, but the truth of the matter is that Neeb was just producing workers. Now I'm not saying that TLO doesn't know what's going on, or he's misreading the game. He knows he's behind, but a lot of times it can be pretty tricky to know just how far behind you actually are. Now there isn't a robotic support bay, is there? No, there is a Templar Archives, which is just about as bad for TLO. Charge is halfway done. Of course, Resonating Glaives was a choice in the early game, so it's done. +1's coming. And Swarm Hosts again are going to be the choice. So we saw TLO try this in game 1. Now I actually really like the Swarm Host in this game compared to the other game, because he is behind. And not just like, oh, my first base got delayed a little bit behind, but like, but really behind in truth. He lost a ton of workers, and he is still behind in workers. Now this is something that you see consistently throughout Neeb's game. Yeah, Neeb's games. Yeah, he's a Protoss player, but he's very diligent about consistently making workers throughout the early and mid game, so he actually gets these pretty crushing advantages over his Zerg opponents. Baneling Nest on the way for TLO. And I guess the Swarm Host Baneling is something that he was doing a lot and wasn't just like a spur of the moment thing. Swarm Hosts are going to attack the mineral line here. As we see, the mineral line got devastated pretty quickly. About half the workers went down. And Neeb very intelligently reacted quickly and noticed that he warped in to deal with the Locust and then sent his big army to try to stomp out the Swarm Hosts themselves to try to alleviate the main problem. And TLO, of course, surged out with his Roach force. And surge is a funny word because he doesn't have Roach speed because of how far behind he got. So he moved out, probably remembered he didn't have Roach speed, got to about here, and then had to retreat because of his Swarm Host being figured out. So the Swarm Hosts are trying to do what they did last game on Defenders and try to encroach again, but Neeb is on top of it this time. He's not expecting Hydra like he probably was at the very beginning of that Defenders game. He knows it's Swarm Host. Now if I was Neeb, I would kind of ironically make a bunch of Archons and just say, what are you going to make a bunch of Banelings again? Now the reason it's ironically making Archons is because he's so far ahead at this point, he can pretty much make anything. Lots of Lings are out, and TLO has a decent amount of roaches, but it looks like now he's going Ling Bane. So I'm going to pause it here. And I know that's a cock tease, but let's just see what both players have. TLO is trying to do this thing where he transitions out of Roach into Ravager Ling Bane, which is smart because, I mean, so many Immortals are out here. Does he have Storm? No Storm out, no Storm being researched. So TLO has to run in here with all of these Lings, but with +1 and Resonating Glaives, let's see how this fight goes. Now there is a ton of Lings. So the Lings run in, but beautiful force fields, and the Ravagers do need to drop down the biles, and they do. So TLO doing a beautiful job of destroying the force fields, but it's just money units left. And whenever the thing about going this like very Ling Bane focus composition is, what do we see now? It's just the sort of Roach Ravager mix, and this is Roach Ravager mix as opposed to Roach Ravager main composition, and that means that the Lings are really the crux of the composition, and the Banes are too. So the Protoss player Neeb surges forward here with the Mortals, with Archons, and you can see here why that composition that Dario went for is scary, but it's one of these things that kind of builds up. TLO built up all those Lings, did that huge attack, and he's forced to GG. So he had all those Lings, all those Banes, he was relying on one big crushing engagement. The force fields prevented the Banes from clean sweeping Neeb. Now even though TLO dropped the biles down, Neeb was able to retain these money units, and once he killed the Lings, TLO was in the spot where he was like, oh crap, okay, I don't actually have that big of an economy, I don't have a macro hatch, so what do I do? Like, make mass Ling to support these roaches that are now caught out off of creep? So great job there by Neeb to take down TLO, and TLO played pretty well. I'm interested to see if this Swarm Host Bane style is something that he does a ton, especially considering Hydra Bane is so popular. Now I did rewind it a little bit. It is kind of perplexing to me to see this composition, because Hydra Bane gets so much play for such a reason. So this army against Hydra Bane, it isn't that great, because the Adepts die to Hydra Bane, the Archons die to Hydras as long as there is something to tank for the Hydras, of course. The Immortals die to Hydra, die to Ling, and the Sentries, now granted that's really like the one difference maker, is the Sentries are really good against Hydra Bane, and they're not as good against Ravager based comps. Now I don't know why Protoss players are seemingly like not really making as many Sentries versus Hydra Bane. Of course that's a very big blanket statement, some of them are, but a lot of the ones that I see dying aren't. So TLO's composition is actually pretty good against people who are relying on force fields, but the fact that he has to attack into this weird Abyssal Reef choke, of course Abyssal Reef has all these silly little up and down plateaus, boom, force fields. And what do we see there? The Lings really just get shredded by all of this insane Archon Immortal firepower, and because they're having to run into these chokes, yeah, TLO had a decent comp in terms of all of those Lings against no splash, other than the Archon splash, but here we see why the composition doesn't receive a lot of play. Okay, you're going to make mass Ling? That's very larva intensive. It can be very tricky to reinforce like that. So another reason this composition can be tricky is if you don't get upgrades for your Lings, then they can't really chew through the army. Ling-based compositions versus Protoss are very reliant on upgrades. Of course, TLO got behind and really couldn't afford to upgrade like he wanted to. So make sure you subscribe for more. That's the series.